The federal government's hopes of making its controversial cashless welfare card scheme permanent in some parts of the country have been scuttled by the Senate. Last-minute wrangling during a late-night sitting of Parliament resulted in a compromise of sorts, with the trial period continuing for another 2 years. Political reporter Matthew Doran is in Parliament House and joins us now. Hi there, Matthew. So is the government chalking this up as a win?
Well, Ros, they're certainly trying to. Good morning to you. But this is something of a defeat for the government. They did want this set in stone as a permanent fixture of Australia's social welfare framework. However, they didn't have enough support to get it over the line and reached this deal that just crept over the line. It only succeeded in the Senate by one vote, and that's because South Australian Centre Alliance Senator Sterling Griff abstained from the vote. Had he voted there, critics of this bill said that it may well have been defeated. For people who don't know what the cashless welfare card is, it's a debit card where recipients of welfare have 80% of their funds quarantined on this debit card that can't be used for things such as alcohol or on gambling. And the idea is that it is meant to help those who have substance abuse issues, gambling addictions in some of those remote and regional communities of Australia get over their addictions because they don't have access to the funds to fuel it. It has been trialled for the last few years in 4 sites across the country, in the East Kimberley region of WA, Ceduna on South Australia's far west coast, and the Bundaberg and Hervey Bay region of Queensland. But it was to be not only locked in there but also extended across the Cape York area and also the Northern Territory, the entire Northern Territory. This is where the criticism comes in, that it is a punitive measure, that it is taking control of people's finances away from them, many of whom do not suffer from those circumstances. And there had also been criticism that it had some racist undertones, particularly when you look at some of the communities where it has been trialled, which do have significant Indigenous populations, but also when you're talking about rolling it out across the entirety of the Northern Territory, that becomes an even sharper criticism of the government. So they had planned to get this there. There had been some early celebration when Rex Patrick, the South Australian Independent, said he wouldn't vote in favour of it. That looked like it would defeat the bill, but then very late in the piece, the Social Services Minister Anne Ruston introduced a few amendments to reach this compromise deal. The government is happy that it is going to be continuing in some form, but certainly the Deputy Prime Minister Michael McCormack conceded this morning on ABC News Breakfast that not everything went to plan.
A little setback, but certainly the cashless welfare card will be continued for at least 2 years in those communities which have asked for it, and that's the important thing. And I appreciate that it's been a trial, appreciate that it will continue. Those communities have asked for it. It's made such a difference for those families in those communities where it has been used.
And Matthew, what were the main sticking points for members of the Crossbench?
Well, certainly a lot of the criticism was that there just wasn't enough data to suggest that this had actually improved the living standards of people in those trial communities. There had been report after report, review after review, which had been somewhat inconclusive in its evidence that problem gambling, substance abuse had been sorted out in some way, shape or form in those communities where the trial was being undertaken. Certainly some of the other criticism from members of the Crossbench, including Tasmanian Senator Jackie Lambie, was that this was something that had been rolled out into communities without associated support services. So it's all well and good to put someone on this debit card if they do have substance abuse issues, but if you're not ramping up the actual health support on the side of that, then it is borderline useless. That's something that she wanted to see put into this legislation, which wasn't. Rex Patrick, who does have one of, or did spend some time in one of those trial sites, Ceduna on the far west coast of South Australia, said that he simply hadn't been convinced that it was a good idea.
One of the major problems with the card is that the government failed to gather empirical data, definitive data that shows that, prior to the card there was X amount of crime, X amount of domestic violence, X amount of admissions in relation to drug or alcohol problems, and then after the trial there was Y amount, and the government simply failed to do that.
Matthew, while that Senate battle was taking place, it appears there was also some movement from the government on its industrial relations legislation.
That's right, Ros. This legislation, which was only introduced to Parliament yesterday, was already being met with fierce criticism from the Labor Party and the union movement with accusations that the coalition was trying to undermine the workers' pay and conditions in some sort of stealthy exercise here. We do understand that Christian Porter, the Attorney General and Industrial Relations Minister, could be considering siphoning off or amending or even dumping altogether certain parts of this bill that are overly contentious. The biggest sticking point at the moment for Labor and the union movement is this proposal to allow some businesses that have been hit hard by the coronavirus crisis to negotiate new deals with their employees, which could leave staff worse off for up to 2 years. Labor believes you can drive a truck through that definition, that there isn't any necessity to show harm, just that a business has been hit by the coronavirus crisis, as all businesses around the country have. And the union movement, the ACTU's Sally McManus, went so far as to say that this was the worst piece of legislation she'd seen in the IR space since the Howard government's controversial work choices legislation back in 2005. Christian Porter says he doesn't want to have a fight over every single piece of industrial relations measures, that he had constructive discussions with members of the union movement and also the business sector, and coming to some conclusion on these measures, and that he is still open to having that discussion. So rather than scuttling the whole piece of legislation here, this omnibus bill, to use the parliamentary jargon, we could see some bits tinkered with as we head into next year. And it will be next year that this is dealt with by Parliament, because today is the final sitting day for Federal Parliament for 2020. Ros?
Matt, thanks.